Daniel Cormier and Nate Diaz clashing online has the entire MMA world talking this week. What started as a podcast conversation quickly escalated into a full-blown war of words. Nate Diaz appeared on Theo Von's show and took aim at several big names, including Daniel Cormier, Dustin Porier, and Charles Oliveira. Cormier did not stay silent either and responded with his own receipts. So let's break down exactly how this confrontation started and how it unfolded. The tension reignited when Diaz appeared on Theo Von's This Past Weekend podcast and launched a fiery rant at the former two-division champion. This was not a casual interview that simply drifted off course. This was classic Nate Diaz, direct, aggressive, and unapologetic. When Diaz gets comfortable in a conversation, he tends to speak his mind without filtering anything. On this occasion, he had a clear list of targets. The first name he brought up was Daniel Cormier. Diaz said on This Past Weekend with Theo Von, "What the hell happened in your career then? Why are you an analyst now, Mr. Know-It-All? Talking about what I should have done when I made more money than you ever made in your whole career at any fight. Mr. Champion, those are the kind of guys that need their asses beat." To understand why Diaz reacted this strongly, you have to look at the comments that sparked it. The tension appears to come from recent statements Cormier made about MVP MMA and the upcoming Diaz vs. Mike Perry matchup. Diaz is set to return to action on May 16, 2026. Facing Mike Perry at MVP MMA 1 inside the Intuit Dome in Los Angeles, California. The event will stream on Netflix. When Cormier discussed that fight on his YouTube channel, he shared a very honest assessment of the matchup. Cormier explained that while the fight itself could be entertaining, he did not view either fighter as being among the top welterweights in the sport today. He said, "The third fight is what might have gotten me most excited, Mike Perry and Nate Diaz. Now let me tell you why. They are not two of the best welterweights in the world. Make no mistake about it, they are not on the level of Kamaru Usman, Islam Makhachev, Jack Della Maddalena, Michael Morales, Sean Brady, or Ian Gary." He continued by stressing that the elite fighters are still competing inside the UFC. Cormier also addressed comparisons people were making between the event and the UFC's highly anticipated White House card. In his view, the comparison was unrealistic. Cormier said, "For people comparing it to the White House card, no chance. Come on guys. The White House card is the best card of the year for sure. It's better than that. Let's just be completely honest." In short, he acknowledged that Diaz vs. Perry could be fun but made it clear he did not see it competing with the UFC's biggest showcase. When Nate Diaz heard those remarks, he clearly took them personally. During his appearance on Theo Von's podcast, he responded with a barrage of criticism aimed directly at Cormier. Diaz said, "I've never seen a single Daniel Cormier fight in my career except for when I was on the same card as him one time. I remember the dude walking around like he owned the place then got knocked out. That was the only DC fight I've ever seen." His comments instantly grabbed attention online. Diaz did not stop there. He continued by questioning Cormier's right to criticize his career. Diaz added, "And he wants to tell me what I should do and why I'm not a good fighter. I'm like, are you mad because you were the champion and when I was nowhere near being a champion I got paid way more money than you? That's a bitter little guy. You're a great wrestler, DC, but you can't fight. You're a big guy. Remember when he cried?" The remarks were sharp, personal, and clearly designed to provoke a reaction. For anyone familiar with Nate Diaz, hearing him go on a lengthy rant like this is unusual. Diaz is not typically known for long interviews or extended commentary. That is why this moment stood out. The card he referenced was UFC 241, where both he and Cormier competed on the same night. That event ended with Stipe Miocic knocking out Cormier to reclaim the UFC heavyweight championship. According to Diaz, that was the only time he actually paid attention to one of Cormier's fights. Two parts of Diaz's rant stood out more than anything else. The first was his claim that he earned more money during his career than Cormier did, even though he never captured a UFC title. The second was the reference to Cormier crying after a loss. Those two remarks were not random. They were carefully aimed at two of the most sensitive aspects of a fighter's career: financial success and emotional moments inside the sport. Daniel Cormier's legacy in MMA is built on major accomplishments. He became a champion in 2 different weight divisions and represented the United States as an Olympic wrestler. His resume includes victories over elite opponents and years at the very top of the sport. When a fighter without a championship belt claims his career was more valuable, it challenges the way success in MMA is traditionally measured. The moment Diaz brought up the emotional reaction after a loss made the exchange even more personal. The scene he referenced happened after Cormier lost to John Jones at UFC 214. In the Octagon interview afterward, Cormier broke down in tears while discussing the defeat. It was one of the most emotional moments the sport has ever seen. Diaz turned that moment into a jab, using it as ammunition during his rant. Once clips of the podcast began circulating online, the MMA community quickly reacted. Fans, fighters, and analysts all weighed in as the back and forth spread across social media. But Daniel Cormier was not the only person Nate Diaz decided to target during that podcast appearance. Another well-known name soon became part of the conversation: Dustin Porier. During the interview, Theo Von asked Diaz about the possibility of fighting Dustin Porier. Instead of giving a straightforward answer, Diaz began criticizing Porier and revisiting the history between them. Diaz explained that their UFC fight never happened because Porier needed surgery when they were originally scheduled to compete. The bout was supposed to take place at UFC 230 in 2018 but ultimately fell apart. Since then, Dustin Porier's career has taken a different direction. After losing to Max Holloway in July 2025, Porier stepped away from active competition. Although he retired from MMA, he later mentioned the idea of boxing Nate Diaz in a high-profile matchup. During an appearance on the JRE MMA show, Porier told Joe Rogan he would be interested in facing Diaz in the boxing ring under the Zuffa boxing banner. Diaz's reaction to that idea was blunt. Speaking on Theo Von's podcast, he mocked Porier for stepping away from competition too early. Diaz said Porier quit his job and then suddenly wanted to box him. His response was, "Why did you quit too early?" The comment immediately created an awkward atmosphere during the interview because Theo Von has a personal friendship with Dustin Porier. As the conversation continued, the tension became noticeable. Theo Von attempted to defend his friend and shift the discussion in a different direction. Diaz, however, kept pushing the jokes and criticisms further. At one point he tried to soften the tone slightly, saying he was only joking and that Porier had done well in his career. But even when Diaz says he is joking, many fans believe there is usually some truth behind his words. The laughter might sound lighthearted, but with Nate Diaz it often works as a kind of cover. Beneath the jokes, there is usually a real point being made. After taking shots at Daniel Cormier and Dustin Porier, Diaz shifted his focus to another major name in the sport, Charles Oliveira. The UFC Hall of Famer Cormier, BMF champion Oliveira, and former scheduled opponent Porier were all part of the list Diaz targeted during the podcast conversation. Diaz's issue with Oliveira centers on the BMF title. For years, Nate Diaz has felt a sense of ownership over that belt. The BMF championship was first introduced for his fight against Jorge Masvidal at UFC 244 back in 2019. In Diaz's mind, that moment created the concept of the belt itself. Because of that, he believes the title carries a connection to his legacy. That is why Oliveira winning the BMF belt from Max Holloway at UFC 326 caught Diaz's attention. When Oliveira walked away with the title, Diaz did not see it as just another championship changing hands. Instead, he viewed it as someone else carrying something he helped create. Diaz openly criticized Oliveira's claim to the belt during his podcast appearance. Diaz said about Oliveira's BMF title, "F Oliveira, who I believe I'd beat the S out of. People I've beaten have beaten him. He's walking around with my belt and this fool won the title." The remark made it clear that Diaz does not recognize Oliveira as the rightful holder of that belt. To him, the BMF title still carries his name attached to it. He continued the criticism by recalling past fight negotiations. Diaz said, "Then Oliveira said no thanks to fighting me. I understand that you have the right to big league me because you're a champion. So go ahead with your sorry eh?" That comment reflected Diaz's belief that Oliveira avoided a potential fight when the opportunity was there. Diaz then pointed out what he viewed as a contradiction. Then a few months later, after Conor breaks his leg all up and gets knocked out, Oliveira goes, "I'll fight Conor McGregor. But I thought you wanted bigger and better things." For Diaz, this sequence reinforced his belief that Oliveira selectively chose opponents. Taken together, those comments revealed Diaz's frustration. From his perspective, Oliveira declined a fight with him but later expressed interest in facing Conor McGregor. In Diaz's mind, that looks like picking a more lucrative or safer opportunity rather than taking on every challenge equally. However, the podcast conversation was not only about criticizing other fighters. Diaz also spoke about his own future and the possibility of returning to the UFC. Before accepting the fight with Mike Perry under the Most Valuable Promotions banner, Diaz said he had discussions about potentially coming back to the octagon. According to Diaz, the UFC had a very specific idea in mind if he returned. He said, "I think that if I went back to UFC they want me to fight Conor McGregor right now. The possibility of a third fight between Diaz and McGregor has been discussed for years, and fans have long wanted to see the trilogy completed. But Diaz explained why he was not interested in taking that fight immediately. He pointed to McGregor's recent injuries and the long layoff from competition. Diaz said, "I want to fight the best of the best when they are the best of the best. Conor's great, but I'm not trying to go kill off Conor when he's on his last dying leg." He added another comment that revealed his mindset regarding the situation. Diaz said, "I'm not trying to be the ending to some guy's story like that. We ain't friends. We ain't none of that. But I ain't trying to finish this dude off. That's what I plan on doing if we're fighting." In other words, Diaz wants the trilogy to happen when both fighters are fully active. So while he did not reject the idea entirely, Diaz made it clear the timing needs to be right. For now, his focus remains on his upcoming fight against Mike Perry at the May 16th Most Valuable Promotions event. The Stockton native explained that he would rather face McGregor after the Irish star has had a proper return to competition. While Diaz was speaking freely on the podcast, the comments quickly began circulating online. Daniel Cormier eventually saw the clips, read the headlines, and decided it was time to respond. This marked a change in approach for the former two-division champion. In the past, when Diaz had thrown insults his way, Cormier generally tried to keep things measured. The two men had exchanged negative remarks before, but Cormier said he never wanted to escalate things too far. Usually he would respond briefly and move on. This time, however, the situation felt different. The remarks about money, the claim that Cormier could not fight, and the reference to the emotional moment after a loss pushed the conversation to another level. Cormier decided he would address everything directly instead of brushing it off. In a recent video posted to his YouTube channel, Cormier responded to Diaz's comments in detail. He said, "Nate Diaz decided to come at me again because that's just what he does. I thought I was very respectful of him when he said I can't fight. When you start putting our careers next to each other, there's obviously an ocean of difference between them." Cormier also explained what he believed triggered Diaz's reaction. He said the rant likely came from the comments he made about Diaz fighting Mike Perry. Cormier admitted that he understood how those remarks might have upset Diaz, but he stood by his opinion about the level of competition. The first issue Cormier addressed was Diaz's claim about money. Cormier said, "The lowest form of insult is when someone says, 'I made more money than you.'" He then explained that both of them had their biggest financial successes because of specific opponents who brought massive attention to their fights. Cormier broke it down clearly. Nate Diaz made his biggest money fighting Conor McGregor. Before that he was making good money, but not that kind of money. "I fought John Jones. That's why I made my biggest money. I know what I made and I'm completely happy with it. It's not like I'm sitting over here struggling." His message was simple. Cormier was not denying Diaz's financial success, but he argued that the comparison itself missed the point. In his view, both fighters earned their biggest paydays because they fought the right rivals at the right moments in their careers. Regarding the financial insults, Cormier brushed them aside as meaningless. He suggested that arguing over money between two wealthy fighters is pointless. Reports indicate Diaz could make around $10 million for his upcoming fight, and Cormier acknowledged that without resentment. At the same time, Cormier emphasized that he is satisfied with his own career earnings and accomplishments. From championships to Olympic credentials to a successful broadcasting career, he believes his legacy speaks for itself, regardless of how much money any single fight generated. Then Cormier shifted the focus to Nate Diaz's career record, and this is where the response became especially sharp. Cormier said, "When you talk about people analyzing fights, there's one thing that's similar, and that is we were champions. Let's compare our losses. John Jones, Stipe Miocic, that's it." As he spoke, he held up two fingers to make the point clear. Two losses in his entire career. John Jones and Stipe Miocic, two of the greatest fighters to ever compete in the octagon. After highlighting his own record, Cormier turned the spotlight toward Diaz's resume. Diaz currently holds a professional record of 21 wins and 13 losses. Cormier continued, 13 losses to 13 people. "When I lost those fights, I was in my mid to late 30s, and you were losing fights in your 20s in your absolute athletic prime in a sport that you chose. You got beat multiple times by all these people." Cormier then reinforced the contrast between their careers. He added, "But you want to talk about me, Mr. Champion? When I was 40 years old, I was winning the UFC heavyweight championship." His message was clear. While Diaz was taking losses during his prime years, Cormier was still winning world titles late in his career. The statistical difference between their records became the centerpiece of DC's argument. Cormier lost to only 2 fighters throughout his career, while Diaz has been defeated by 13 opponents. To drive the point home, Cormier even listed several of those losses, mentioning opponents ranging from Koji Oishi to Leon Edwards before again emphasizing that his own defeats came only against John Jones and Stipe Miocic. Cormier stressed the timing of those losses as well. "You lost to 13 people," he said. "You were losing fights in your 20s. You were in your absolute athletic prime in a sport that you chose and you got beat multiple times by all these people. That to me is crazy." The implication was that Diaz's losses came during years when most elite fighters are at their peak. But the record comparison was not even the most emotional part of Cormier's response. The comments about crying after losses clearly struck a deeper nerve. Instead of avoiding the topic, Cormier addressed it directly and flipped the criticism around. Cormier responded, "He said you cried. Nate, maybe you should have cried more. Then maybe we would think you cared about winning and losing." The remark turned Diaz's insult into an argument about passion and competitive drive. Cormier continued, "Maybe if you cried, Nathan, you wouldn't be so okay with losing. Because I cried. Losing to me was like death. That's why I cried." In that moment, Cormier framed his emotional reaction not as weakness, but as proof of how much winning meant to him. He then contrasted his mindset with what he sees from Diaz after defeats. "You don't cry. You go to the after party. You go hang out with your friends. You go get beat on a Saturday and on Monday you're talking like you're the best in the world." It was one of the more revealing statements Cormier has made publicly about how he views Diaz's attitude toward losses. Cormier also referenced a specific moment from Diaz's career to support his argument. He recalled Diaz's 2013 fight against Josh Thompson, which ended with Diaz suffering a TKO defeat after his corner stopped the fight. Cormier said, "I was there when they had to throw the towel in with Josh Thompson." By bringing up that moment, Cormier reinforced the idea that Diaz's career includes several difficult nights that critics often overlook. For DC, those moments highlight the difference between their career trajectories. Then came the line that immediately grabbed headlines. Cormier said, "That's what I keep telling you, Nathan. We're different people. You're mad because the reality is you're average. You've always been." He continued by pointing out that Diaz has often called out elite fighters like Khabib Nurmagomedov, Justin Gaethje, and Dustin Porier, athletes who competed for or held championship titles. Cormier repeated the word again to make his point unmistakable. "I don't dislike Nate Diaz. But if you ask me what I feel about his career, you're average. You're average." The remark became the defining quote from his response video. This was not the first time Cormier had expressed that opinion. The topic previously came up during a podcast conversation with Ben Askren, where Diaz was also described as an average fighter. In this latest response, Cormier doubled down on that assessment. Despite the criticism, Cormier also made it clear that he harbors no personal hatred toward Diaz. He said he wishes Diaz and his family well and respects the financial success Diaz has achieved during his career. However, he insists that records and results ultimately tell the story of a fighter's legacy. In elite competition, the word average carries a very different meaning. In everyday conversation it might not sound harsh, but in the context of championship-level fighting it can be extremely dismissive. Calling a fighter average suggests they were never truly among the sport's elite. For someone like Nate Diaz, who has built a massive following and a reputation as a fan favorite, hearing a Hall of Famer describe his career that way is bound to sting. Diaz's fan base often views him as a cult hero whose influence extends far beyond statistics. Cormier also criticized Diaz's habit of calling out the biggest names in the division. Fighters such as Khabib Nurmagomedov, Justin Gaethje, and Dustin Porier were mentioned as examples of competitors who operated at a different level. According to Cormier, Diaz frequently targeted those elite names despite not having a record that matched theirs. To strengthen that argument, Cormier compared Diaz's record to that of modern champions. He pointed to fighters like Ilia Topuria and Islam Makhachev as examples of competitors at the very top of the sport who do not accumulate double-digit losses. That comparison helped underline his point. Elite champions rarely carry records with so many defeats because they consistently perform at the highest level of competition. Diaz, by contrast, has accumulated 13 losses across his career. Even with all of that criticism, Cormier maintained that his disagreement with Diaz is professional rather than personal. He said that if the two men ever cross paths, he would prefer to keep the interaction civil rather than turning it into a physical confrontation. Cormier explained, "I don't dislike Nate Diaz, but I feel strongly about his career and what it represents." That statement summed up the difference between their approaches during this feud. Diaz's attack focused on personal insults, questioning Cormier's toughness, mocking his emotional reaction after a loss, and claiming financial superiority. Cormier responded in a different way. Instead of trading insults, he leaned on statistics and achievements. So where does the situation go from here? Both men have clearly laid out their positions. Diaz believes Cormier is a bitter analyst who earned less money and cannot accept it. Cormier believes Diaz is an average fighter whose record does not match his reputation. The argument is unfolding while Diaz prepares for his return to MMA competition. Since leaving the UFC after his win at UFC 279, Diaz has not competed in mixed martial arts, although he did defeat Jorge Masvidal in a boxing match in 2024. There were also reports that Diaz had discussions with UFC CEO Dana White about a possible return later this year, although those negotiations eventually stalled. After his upcoming fight against Mike Perry, those talks could potentially resume. It is also important to remember that this rivalry did not begin this week. The tension between Cormier and Diaz has been building for years through several public disagreements. One early spark came after Diaz's final UFC fight against Tony Ferguson